English Planet. Appunti di inglese, a cura di Nicholas Youldon.
Good evening, everybody. You're tuned to Radio Dreamland, and you're listening to another lesson in the series of English Planet, with your eco-spiritual English teacher, Nick Youldon, at the microphone. I prefer my English voice to my Italian voice, so I will conduct this lesson in English, and you will understand me. I'm sure you will, because I believe in you. Generally speaking, students of English understand more than they actually think they do. So just believe and listen. In any case, this lesson is in podcast on Radio Dreamland's website, and you can always listen again and practice as many times as you like. In line with my philosophy of communicating for understanding, well-being and happiness, I'd like this evening just to focus a little on basic steps, basic methods of addressing English people, speaking to English people without offending them. This is not as simple as you may think, because social conventions are different in each culture. There are differences, obviously, between English people and Italian people, how they speak to each other and how they approach each other. In point of fact, it's very easy also for you to be offended by how an English person will speak to you. You may have a surprise, for example, when you arrive at London Airport and take one of those nice, friendly, comfortable taxis, and the driver says to you immediately, "Where do you want to go, love?" First point is that this is a perfectly normal phrase for an English taxi driver, even if he is not in the least familiar with his passengers. The word love, in this sense, it is used quite commonly in England in common situations, in shops, in pubs, in bars, in cafes, in the street. The word love is now common usage. Classical titles such as even Sir or Madam, or Architect or Lord, they're absolutely disappearing. We don't say, "Where do you want to go, sir? Where do you want to go, madam? What would you like, architect?" Our taxi driver is not being over-familiar or making romantic advances. He is simply being normally friendly and a basically polite form. You could say that the level of formality in normal human interaction is probably lower in England than it is in Italy. We don't, for example, have a form of lei for responding to people. We don't have to go through that period when we use a particular form until we know someone, and then we use a more informal form, changing from lei to tu, for example. People do this in Italy, yes, they do it in Germany too, yes, but they don't do it in England. It doesn't exist. In English, you is simply you, singular or plural. It's true that it's better for you not to go to London and address everybody with the term love until you spend some time with the English people and begin to feel exactly how to use these forms. The dear sir, dear madam, can I help you, sir? Can I help you, madam? Yes, they are still used, but these are also not simple to use. They may seem over formal sometimes. If you are looking for information or inviting a conversation, usually it's not necessary to use any form of title. You can just ask a direct question if the person is looking at you. For example, what time is it? Or where is the nearest train station? It's much better, obviously, if you finish these questions with the simple word please, which is very much appreciated by English people and understood as a common form of civil behavior. So you should say, Where is the nearest bank, please? Or where is the nearest train station, please? And you will normally be given an answer. If a person is not looking at you or you want to attract someone's attention, you should say, "Excuse me," or "Excuse me, please." Then wait to see that the person is listening and continue with your question. It's not necessary, it should be avoided to go around saying sorry. Sorry is not used to attract attention. Sorry is used to apologize if there is something wrong. To refer to Italian in this sense, sorry corresponds more or less to mi dispiace. Mi scusi, on the other hand, in Italian corresponds to excuse me. If you do or say something wrong and hurt or offend a person, you should say sorry. If you simply want to attract attention, you should say excuse me or excuse me please. We don't need a sir or madam or any other title in addition, because we know that we are speaking person to person directly. In English, if you are addressing a person you don't know, a person who may be older than you, a person who you think may deserve respect, who seems to be maybe a doctor, a professor, or an architect, you don't need to form a sentence like "Mi scusi lei, ma lei può aiutarmi?" This form is not necessary, it doesn't exist, so you cannot say it. The question would be quite simply, "Can you help me?" The basic question is the same if you are speaking to your sister, your brother, your mother, a normal person in the street, or even a person who looks very, very important. In English, we don't use titles if we don't know the people and we don't know the titles. What we use are softer forms of questions, more polite forms of questions. When you're at home with your family, you may say to your mother or your father or your sister, "I want a cup of tea and I want a biscuit." A simple, direct question with no frills, corresponding in Italian to "Voglio una tazza di tè," "Voglio un biscotto." But in English, as in Italian, possibly more so in English, we use a different form for different situations. If you are in a restaurant or a bar, for example, you don't say, I want a cup of tea. You say, "I would like," or "I'd like a cup of tea, please." Here we need to learn and understand the concept of can and could, will and would, shall and should. These are examples of what we call modal auxiliaries. They are a form of verbs, but defective verbs. They don't change their simple forms. As an example, I have two different possibilities for making a simple request. I can say, "Can you help me?" or "Could you help me, please?" The first form is quite direct and familiar because we use the word can. Can is an auxiliary which expresses the capacity or the ability to do something. If I say to someone, "Can you help me?" or "Can you help me please?" I am simply asking if there is a possibility, a real possibility. If I want to say the same thing or make the same request without being too direct or too apparently insistent, I say, "Could you help me please?" Could is a subjunctive form of the word can, which corresponds in Italian to the congiuntivo. Being a subjunctive, it gives the idea, the impression that possibly my request is not realistic, and therefore I cannot insist or demand. The concept is exactly the same in Italian, where you can ask, "Puoi aiutarmi?" or "Potresti aiutarmi?" The effect is the same. The second form is more polite and less direct, but also more formal. The same situation is repeated with will and would. Will is not much used for the type of request that we're looking at here, but would is frequently used. For example, as we said before, the difference between I want a cup of tea and I'd like a cup of tea, where I'd is the abbreviation of I would like a cup of tea. This particular expression, I'd like, I would like, is very much overused possibly in English for millions of situations. It's a general form for asking, requesting things or services. I'd like a ticket to New York, please. I'd like a pair of shoes, size 9, please. I'd like a loaf of bread, please. In these situations, it's I'd like is coupled with the object of our desire. As I say, a sandwich, a piece of bread, a gold ring, a lot of money, or whatever. I'd like a cup of tea. But if our desire is an activity, then we must use a verb, a phrase, including a verb. I'd like to go to the cinema. If you're in the taxi, I'd like to go to Trafalgar Square, please. If you don't want to use a taxi, you can hire a car. I'd like to hire a large limousine for Friday night, please. We're using here a polite or indirect form because in reality we don't know if it's possible to do or have the object or the activity of our desire. Therefore we cannot insist or demand, we can only ask politely. The problem in our society obviously is that if you go to the car hire office and you say something like, I want to hire a big car, the assistant or the clerk or the operator behind the office will consider you arrogant, insistent or intolerant, and probably will not help you with the car. As a parenthesis to this particular point, you have to pay attention between I'd like, I would like, and I like. If we say I'd like or I would like an apple, we are saying in Italian, vorrei una mela. On the other hand, if we say I like apples, we are saying in Italian, mi piacciono le mele, which is completely another thing. The point here is the important point is that in English we use these fixed special expressions to be formal, informal, polite, familiar, not arrogant, for example, rather than using titles and particular formal words. There is a whole bunch of somewhat crazy expressions which we can use, and we can use a multiple list of these to make a really something which becomes ridiculous, comical, and a habit which an English habit which foreign people often laugh about. For example, to be non-direct, we can say things like, "Oh, excuse me, I wonder if could you possibly, if it's not too much trouble, would it really be possible for you to just help me, please?" This corresponds in Italian to something like, "Oh, mi stavo chiedendo, vorrei che se non è troppo, magari, forse se non disturbo, nell'eventualità che lei potrebbe aiutarmi, possibilmente." I don't recommend going to extremes, but there are some English people who do that. That's why Britain is such a charming and curious place to visit. There is one more quick point on the same subject here, that sometimes the fixed expression has a particular form. If you say, for example, "Could you open the door for me, please?" This is a polite, formal request. You could also use a form, but this is an alternative. "Would you mind opening the door for me, please?" As I say, this is an alternative. They have exactly the same meaning and the same purpose. Just as in Italian you could say potrebbe aprire, le dispiacerebbe aprire, but in English we say could you open, directly with an infinitive. But if you say would you mind, you have to say would you mind opening, using the participle form of the verb open. As I said, these are fixed forms or expressions, part of idiomatic English. They should be memorized. They are not difficult to memorize. They should be memorized, and you don't have to spend too much time thinking or worrying about the grammatical aspects of these forms. Basically, grammar is only a reflection of what people actually say. Unfortunately, now I have to interrupt this lesson. I've given some ideas on how to start to make friends in Britain. Now we'll have a brief stop for publicity, and I'll be back with you very, very shortly to chat to you simply in English. Stay tuned.
Meditazione planetaria del martedì. Radio Dreamland si unisce all'iniziativa della meditazione planetaria del martedì sera, organizzata dal New Earth Circle. Ogni martedì sera alle 21 vi invitiamo a partecipare alla meditazione planetaria dedicata a Madre Terra e a tutti i suoi figli di qualsiasi specie. Ognuno può unirsi al cerchio planetario dei meditanti partecipando da soli o con i propri cari, per una testimonianza di pace e di spiritualità che abbracci tutto il pianeta, per un atto d'amore verso Madre Terra, per un mondo antispecista. Unitevi con noi in meditazione seguendo la Nassinar, la musica del vuoto eseguita al flauto da Giancarlo Barbadoro. Ogni martedì alle 21. Per informazioni www.newearthcircle.org. Radio Dreamland. Share the vision.
Welcome back to English Planet Part 2. The tea break is over. I've had a cup of tea and a biscuit. I feel refreshed, and it's time to relate just a little bit in English about experiences from the world of eco-spirituality, the world of the invisible, and the world of mystery. Talking of mystery and legends, which I was talking about last week in the last lesson, I began to reflect on how exactly we have all the information, the understanding, the knowledge which we have. What's the difference between history and legend? Why are they controversial and contradictory? What is the truth of human history? As a person who has been professionally involved in language and linguistics over a very long period, I was asking myself a question which I've asked on occasions before. Why do people seem to be so, hypnotized, indoctrinated, credulous about the existence of documents, and why is a document more substantial than the word of a person, the spoken word? Why is the written word, why does it seem more concrete and correct to us than the spoken word? We all live in a modern technological world where everything exists on a computer. Everything is recorded and registered officially. Illiteracy, the inability to read or write are considered more or less equivalent to insanity. You're incapable of performing in society if you cannot read or write. This is at the same time cruel and incorrect, because a person can be perfectly functional and extremely intelligent, but for some reason they don't want, or they have never learned or how to read and write. When those few remaining isolated communities of indigenous people are encountered by modern society, the missionaries and the explorers, for example, the first thing they have to do, apart from putting on clothes, is to learn how to read and write. But those groups of people may very well not need to read and write if they're surviving and self-sufficient in the environment where they are and perfectly happy. Then why should they need to learn to read and write? Living in our modern environment, we all have come to believe that it is normal to read and write, and that if you can't do that, there's something wrong with you. It is also presumed that the existence of books and written documents or printed documents are in some case essential for human experience and for human progress. But it seems to me that we have a lot of information in our brains and in our consciousness which doesn't, to me, come from simply reading and written material, but comes from some other source, which must be basically the spoken word, that baggage of knowledge which is carried around by humanity. But how is this passed on from people to people, and how creditable is it? When I became interested in crop circles many years ago in England, I was reading reports and stories in the national newspapers. These appeared occasionally and sometimes said that the crop circles were a real phenomenon. Sometimes they said they were jokes or fakes in some way. The debate was open, but an absolute solution was never given. I had no confirmation or otherwise from written information, written sources, to make me believe that crop circles actually existed or not. And so I went for many years in the situation of not knowing. Then one time I went on a visit to not a crop circle, but to a stone circle in Avebury, one of the biggest, possibly the biggest site in England, even bigger than Stonehenge. When I went there to visit the stone circle, I visited shops and I spoke to people, and I discovered that there was a huge number of people investigating the phenomenon of crop circles, which were based around this area of Avebury, and there was a lot of information being passed around, both in written form and in spoken form by people who actually observed crop circles and actually reported on crop circles. I, in fact, spoke to a friend of mine where I used to live, a friend that I was at school with. He had some land, and he reported to me that a crop circle had occurred on his own land. This was never reported in any newspaper or recorded or registered in any document, but I know from fact that this happened. It was described by his children and himself on his land to me in person. So I can confirm that I have some actual real information which has never been recorded on paper. Obviously, that this information should become wider known depends on the fact that people can meet, people can move around, people can talk and pass on information. You need different methods for passing on this information, obviously. But I would say that written information is not the only, and possibly is even not the most important form of passing on information. What I was speaking about last week on my program was the story of the Grail, King Arthur, Avalon, and Glastonbury, a small village near where I was born. Now, two principal writers are renowned and recorded as being the authors of official, let's say, information regarding the legend of King Arthur and the presence of the Grail in Glastonbury. These authors, though, were two Christian monks. They must have been Christian because they wrote around 1200 or 1100, and the only people with the ability to write and with information available were Christians, were monks or abbots or people working in monasteries. But the truth which they had written down was only collected from sources which were passed down by word of mouth. In many cases they were not copying from original documents. They were listening to what people said of local legends and local stories from local people. We consider it, in modern times, we consider it perfectly normal to read our information in newspapers, magazines, computers, Google, World Wide Web, everywhere else. Every individual sits in an individual place with an individual computer, a book, a magazine, a newspaper, and reads information. But I think we forget frequently that it was not always like that. In fact, until very recent times, many people could not read. Books and magazines were not available. Even in the last century, there were times where people could not read individual books. They sat in groups. One person had a book or a newspaper and read to the other people, and because the material was not available. Sometimes people could not read because other people would read for them. This 100, 200 years ago in all of modern educated Europe was quite a normal situation. The world probably considers William Shakespeare as one of the greatest writers in history. He wrote books, but in reality Shakespeare did not write books. Shakespeare wrote plays. How were his plays communicated? They were communicated in theaters. They were spoken. They had live audiences listening. Information, if anything, was passed on in this way in the time of Shakespeare and for centuries after. People would go to meetings or theatrical shows and listen. News, information, stories would be passed on with the spoken word, not with the written word. As I said, the history of Glastonbury was largely based on the work of Christian scholars writing approximately 1,000 years ago. But they obviously used local information, not written, documented information, and they constructed a rather confused picture. Because they were Christian scholars, they gave a lot of focus, a lot of balance towards the Christian aspect of Glastonbury, and less balance towards non-Christian, so-called legendary aspects, the story of King Arthur, the existence of pagan sacred sites prior to Christianity, for example. Over time, because of the written aspect of the work, the Christian aspect takes on credibility, while the non-Christian aspect becomes legend and not credible. The founder of Radio Dreamland, Giancarlo Barbadoro, did an enormous amount of research work on the legend of Rama and Fetonte in Piedmont. His research could not have been effective without reliance on locally based knowledge, word of mouth, and the existence also of architectural remains in the Susa Valley. What is or was a partially discredited legend is now becoming history. It's becoming a historic fact. For me, information, knowledge, understanding depend on the fact that people can communicate with one another, that information can be passed on in alternative forms, not simply in books and magazine reports. In the Middle Ages, bards and traveling musicians would carry information and would pass on knowledge to local peoples. In that way, it spread around. In fact, recently I was looking at the text to a folk song which I found curious. The folk song is known as The Two Sisters, or possibly the Cruel Sister. It tells a tale of two sisters in the north of England, one of whom was beautiful, one of whom was less beautiful. The less beautiful one was jealous and killed the more beautiful one. The one who died, the body of the dead sister was recovered. A bone was taken from her body and converted into a harp, a musical instrument. And mysteriously, this harp would play with no musician. It would play music of its own accord. There are lyrics, obviously written lyrics for this song, but what I discovered is that there are many various local variations of this song with different lyrics in different parts of Britain, and not only in different parts of Britain, in different parts of Europe. The same song essentially exists, the same information exists, with, as I say, local variations. In some way, information passes without the need for books or writing. Don't get me wrong, I'm not telling anyone to burn books or smash their computers to pieces. This is simply an observation on keeping an open mind and looking for information and believing in information from where we can find it. We have a kind of collective consciousness or understanding. We have to make use of it. We have to protect it and value it for what it is. I am just making a few simple observations, personal observations on the world of the invisible. Invisible because I'm talking about information which is not written down. And which I cannot retrieve on my computer monitor. I would just like to give people food for thought, no more, no less. For this evening, time has run out. That's all for now. This is Nick Youldon wishing you a good evening, and remember to stay tuned as much as possible to Radio Dreamland, and I'll be back again next Monday with another edition of English Planet. In the meantime, share the vision. Good night.